This is that really creepy building. And they say all that stuff happened here, and that freaky guy with the mask is said to live here. I don't like it.
It's been like a year since anyone's seen him, and the place has been pretty quiet since then.
I hope so. I hope we're in the clear.
Well, let's see what's behind door number 1. I don't think it's gonna be fine.
Would you like to hear a story?
No, not really.
Get in here! I've always found it interesting how stories have a way of gaining a life of their own, growing beyond the original concepts of the author. That's what our story is about tonight, actually. It is a tale known as The Legends of the Soui Tribe.
Of the countless legends and stories that circulate around the Peaksport area, the most prolific is the tales of the Soui tribe, which was founded by Joseph Soui in 1958. The Ranchilla Act saw the removal of multiple benefits from Native American tribes, as well as the voluntary relocation of families. Joseph was a known drunkard and had numerous arrests for various violent crimes. With such a record, he grew paranoid about the relocating, and so kidnapped a local woman and fled into the mountains. There he forced her to bear a dozen children. This family, who survived by stealing and highway robbery, became known as the Soui tribe to locals. Another tale of the tribe's origin claims that Joseph was a claim jumper who commanded a criminal network. Supposedly his gang fought General Crook, but were so soundly beaten that he took pity on them and allowed them to run away and hide in the mountain range, deeming them nothing more than petty thieves who honestly could have been eliminated at any time. One version of the story claims that Joseph wasn't actually a Native American at all. Instead, he's a preacher who lost his faith and formed a cult worshipping the dead but growing god in the soil. The town of Peaksport believed his ranting was blasphemous and hung him, but a few of his followers hid in the mountains and swore to blight the area forever to avenge their high priest. Regardless of origins, several key factors do correlate. The leader and source is always a man named Joseph Soui. He is irredeemable, and whether he is dead or still alive, his followers are dangerous. Though, to date, none of the tribe members have ever been arrested or seen by witnesses. Many people have disappeared in the mountains of Peaksport for sure, and most are attributed to the Soui tribe. While some say it is simply that the mountains themselves are dangerous, there is no end to the tales of strange events and happenings that led to one person or another vanishing. In 1983, Jessica Park was hiking with her 2 friends. The girls heard what they described as a bird call that they had not been familiar with. Jessica boldly went ahead of her friends to see this bird, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her. Her friends claimed they heard no sounds of struggle or found any of her belongings. It was 10 years later, in 1993, when hikers found a pile of neatly folded clothes and an empty backpack on the trail. Law enforcement found hair strands, which DNA scans matched with Jessica Parker. In 1976, a man by the name of Chuck Sheds, or Old Chuckles as he was known in town, had gone into the mountains to prospect, but never returned. After no one had seen him for roughly a week, a search party was formed. After sweeping for several hours, his headless body was found slumped against a tree by a stream, with only his own footprints in the mud. Perhaps the darkest tale is of Timothy Mars, who had gotten a puppy for his 7th birthday, whom he named Duke. After his birthday party, Tim took Duke for a walk with his parents. But when Tim's father stopped to tie his shoes, Tim and his puppy were gone. After searching all night, the puppy's body was found, with traces of human flesh in its teeth. Most of the dog's bones were broken. Timothy was never found. However, 1 year later, a human skull was located. Forensic reports indicated that the skull had to have belonged to, roughly speaking, a 7-year-old male. Legend says that even as a mere puppy, Duke attempted to fight the Soui tribe to protect his master, and even now, to this day, ghostly dogs are said to prowl the mountains, seeking to protect others from suffering the same fate that Timothy did. Of course, such tales are all too common, and often the source of arguments, as all of them paint crude and stereotypical depictions of Native Americans. Just like they're supposed to. Allow me to explain. In the fall of 1986, Mitchell Betts was exploring the Peaksport mountain range, studying the effects of the tragic Crown Lake incident from 1976. The event had become a hot seat of political scandal, to the point that most didn't even consider how the environment was damaged. So, there he was, out on the mountain taking samples and photographs. It was exhausting work that only became more infuriating when none of his readings and samples made any sense. Whatever Encompass had spilled was not simple tap water. After several days and more unrecognizable bacterial samples than he could count, he was about to pack up his gear and return to town, until an odor got his attention. It smelled sweet. Too sweet. Almost sickening. Against his better judgment, he decided to find the source. It was a powerful and pungent odor. It all at once made him want to turn away from it, and also seemed to somehow pull him. He couldn't compare it to anything. It smelled both artificial but somehow profoundly familiar. For a moment he wondered why he was even walking towards it, but he simply didn't stop. The ground started to change under his feet. The dry dirt gave way to an odd sponge-like soil, with a tint of green covering it. He stopped and pushed his fingers down into it, wondering if the green tint was some layer of algae or moss, but it didn't stick to his fingers. The ground itself was simply that color. He wondered what on earth could have been spilled in that incident that would cause this, but he soon found more interesting things to ponder. Long, thin green stalks that reached as high as the trees, which he also noticed had become much more spread out and thin. He figured that these must be some kind of sapling, growing up from underneath an older generation of trees, mutated by the Encompass chemicals. But even that was not a satisfactory answer. They had no branches or leaves or anything growing on them at all. Just long, thin green stalks. The sweet odor only became stronger when he stepped close to them. He put his hand on one and felt that they were soft, like the ground had become. He started walking past the first one towards another when he felt a tug on his back. He pulled against it, and quickly felt his feet leave the ground. He was pulled several feet into the air. He tried to turn and twist to see what had hold of him, and finally saw it. One of the stalks. It took a moment to even process what he was seeing. It hadn't wrapped around him or pierced his body. The stalk was just touching his shirt, but that alone was somehow enough to pick him up. The other stalks bent slowly, and finally he saw the source of the weird smell that had brought him here. Bodies. Decaying animals of all kinds and size were tangled in the upper reaches of the stalks. He gasped, realizing what he was seeing. The ground, the stalks, the odor. This was all a gigantic plant. Some kind of freakish sundew plant, to be specific. Looking back at the stalks, he could see clear, sticky sap oozing from their stems. It couldn't be real. Sundews don't even grow in this part of the world, let alone to this size. There had to be some other explanation. But, as if responding to his mental protests, another one of the stalks bent and touched the leg of his pants. This thing was very real. And, looking at the various corpses he was now suspended with, it was very really trying to eat him. That was when he realized. Sundew plants don't eat anything. They grab their prey and wait for them to starve or dehydrate, then let their rotting parts fall into their body to be absorbed as nourishment. They had no eyes, no ears, or mouth to speak of. Assuming, of course, that this was literally a giant sundew, it would only have its sense of touch. He had one, and only one, possible way to get out of this. Slowly, inch by nerve-wracking inch, he started to try and pull himself out of his shirt. He constantly had to stop, though. Every move, every slight change in the weight, every bit of pressure would alert the plant. So he had to do this as slowly as possible. He could only guess that it had been hours, but he was finally free from his shirt, and suddenly fell forward, crashing onto the ground. He almost laughed until he felt a tight grip on his pant leg. The other stalk had sensed his fall, and so started to coil around his leg, and slowly began to arch. Soon he would be lifted up into the air, upside down. He knew he couldn't slowly take his pants off in such a state, at least not without drawing the other stalks to him. So it became a frantic race to undo his belt, kick off his shoes, and wiggle his way out of his pants as swiftly as he could. In one swift motion, the plant stalk jetted back upward, holding his empty pants like some sort of mocking flag. He was free, but now he was too afraid to move. He laid there watching the stalks sway slightly. Still alert, even the ground seemed to softly thump underneath him. He felt so small. This thing was alive, and the most he could do was hope to escape it. Laying there, he almost felt a strange playfulness from the way the stalks moved. It was almost as if they were teasing him, wanting him to take the next move in a game, eager to play its own cards and move its own pieces. So, he slowly started to crawl on his back towards the edge of the mass, back to the dry dirt of the woods. Just like he expected, the stalk started to lean and sway in his direction. Thankfully, he was able to shimmy faster than the stems could move, and after the longest few minutes of his life, he felt the dirt and in one quick lunge turned and threw himself as far away from the plant as he could. He looked back at it. The stalks slowly returned to their upright stance, still and peaceful. He had won their game, and fair is fair, it halted its attack. Still, its sweet smell hung in the air, as if it was daring him to come and play the best 2 out of 3. He had to shake his head. This thing wasn't alive. It wasn't toying with him. It was just a big plant, doing what plants do to survive, on a massive scale. It wasn't personal. It wasn't thinking of him as a toy. It wasn't thinking at all. But sitting there, looking at it, he couldn't help but feel it was still wonderful. Nothing like this had ever been documented. It defied everything he or anyone in humanity has ever understood about plants. If only he could get a sample of its tissue. That thought made him sick. This thing grabbed him because it needed food. Without that, it will die. What did he need a sample for? Was he going to die if he didn't cut this thing? This plant, as it was, in its natural environment, was beautiful. He, nor anyone else, had any right or reason to hurt it. Hell, how many researchers would get hurt if they tried to study the thing? And of course, who would be blamed? The plant, literally doing nothing but existing. No, he couldn't take samples. He couldn't even tell anyone about it. He had to protect it. He needed to make people stay away. This thing would surely grow and die in its own time, like any other plant. The sheer size alone meant it would never be able to sustain itself. He just needed people to leave it alone for a little longer, a couple of years at most. So he left, and went to work publishing accounts in any paper, magazine, or news station that would listen, telling tall tales of murderous inbred lunatics and ghosts, hinted with the classic notes of bigotry and xenophobia, and that was even before the internet became widespread. After that, it was even easier to share the stories. And just like he hoped, everyone who heard the tales responded with denouncements and accusations. In time, Peaksport, as far as the rest of the world knew, was nothing more than a miserable little pit of racists and supremacists who didn't deserve attention or respect. True, maybe the town would suffer for that, but in just a few years the plant would surely pass away, the region would be safe, and the stories would play themselves out. They'd be forgotten one day, and the town would eventually recover. Everything just needed to wait. Surely the plant would be gone soon. It couldn't still be alive and growing. Surely.
Well, I didn't think it was that bad. I guess everyone's a critic. I will agree, though. At first, I didn't think I liked that story very much, but the ending really grew on me. Good night, all. And of course, donect itorum convenient.
We're gonna be so famous because of this. Just
Eh.
gotta see what's behind door number 1. Oh, damn. I don't think it's fun.